We appreciate you coming here today in our weekly town hall event with Conscious Capitalism Connecticut. And before I introduced our guests, Mark Argosh and Chris Kundhart this afternoon, I just want to intro as to what conscious capitalism is and what it isn't. We know it's all of these things, but we also know the idea, and it's a little bit troubled with being fair with distributing prosperity evenly and fairly. So that's what we try and do at Conscious Capitalism. These are the 4 tenets where we talk about, sure, you got to make money, but it really helps you and the community if you lead with a strong sense of purpose. Having a healthy culture, having a fun place to work is changed a lot lately in the last few months. Right? Looking after your people, not so much a top-down hierarchical model that used to be popular way back then. And then looking at stakeholders that are throughout the community, not just the shareholders. As our founder, Raj Sisodia, has published this in many times over, the fact that your organization can perform much better when you follow these ideas. Globally, we've got 40 of them in the US. There are a lot of brands that are very active within this community to talk about all of the good work they do. And of course, the local chapter was founded in 2016. And we have a community now of closer to 1,800 CEOs, CFOs, and people that really want to make difference in the business community. And our sponsors at this point are RWA and the Greater New Haven Chamber. So, and if you want to contact me, we've got those are my contact details. We're very active with the Chamber on social media. We'd love you to share your ideas. We do have a very popular Curious Capitalist podcast series, of which Mark was our latest victim. Thank you, Mark, for that. And we're also running a campaign asking if you know businesses that are doing really good work in the community. Without any further ado, I will introduce our speakers today, Mark Argosh and Chris Kundhart. They come from a wonderful organisation based in Fairfield Market called Social Venture Partners, SVP. And they're here today to share their incredible stories about the way they've been able to leverage the influence in the non-profit community and the business community, and also within government as well. At this point, I'd like to switch it over to Mark. Thank you.
Glenn, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us here. We've been big supporters of conscious capitalism. We think it's a great movement and very complementary to the work that Social Venture Partners is all about. We're both trying to create kind of a fairer and more inclusive communities throughout our state and our country. So Social Venture Partners is really like a venture capital organization for nonprofits. We make grants and provide capacity building assistance to help nonprofits grow their impact. We're statewide in focus and have a group in New Haven. We have a group in Fairfield County, and we're just really getting going in Hartford and Waterbury. But we also work on statewide projects as well. We do have a theme, which is helping to close the opportunity gap in Connecticut. And we tend to focus in education and workforce development, taking a cradle to career approach.
Mark, I'll just add, we've got about 175 partners today, give or take, maybe a little more. And most are people with business backgrounds who are at a point in their career where they want to lean in and give back. It's less financial, there's a financial component, but more it's giving their time. So we spend a lot of time, we do a lot of consulting and advising with our nonprofit partners to help them grow and improve.
Thanks. We've already had a question that came into me privately about describing the workforce challenges, the workforce development challenges that the state of Connecticut faces.
I would say that Connecticut has some very strong industry sectors and also a very talented workforce. I think the challenge is to continue to grow the economy, to alignment between our educational system, provide opportunities to populations that have historically had immigrants, whether it's the reentry population, opportunity youth, and others, and really making sure that those opportunities are partners works on this in a couple of different ways. One is we work with individual nonprofits that have a workforce focus, and we could talk about that. And then we also get involved with statewide policy, principally now working to support the Governor's Workforce Council.
Build on what Mark said, and Mark, I may not get these numbers exactly right, but part of the challenge in Connecticut is that you have these sectors, these industry sectors that have big employment needs over the next 1, 3, 5 years. Manufacturing, which is still very big in Connecticut. Correct me, Mark, I think it's over the next 5 years, 25, 30,000 jobs to be filled. Some of it through growth and a lot of it through aging workforce and just people who are workers who are retiring. I think, organizations like Connecticut Light and Power, is another one that has big staffing needs over the next 5 years. And while you have all these great job opportunities, at the same time in Connecticut, you have a lot of challenged populations in the inner cities, especially, who are looking for work yet to get to the level of qualification needed to join these organizations and tap into those job opportunities that are out there. So Career Resources is one of Social Venture Partners investees. They're one of the largest nonprofit workforce, about 8 million in revenues, and they have support. And some of these programs are focused on inner city opportunity youth, but all of them are basically using a model long soft training program to basically help with interview skills and showing up on time and all of the basic skills that these customers need in order to be able to succeed in the workforce at an entry level. The program is very impactful, and what we are working on with Career Resources is to take that successful program and try to take it to another level. And one level that we're going to add is going to be some vocational training, which is going to get stacked on top of the soft skills training that CRI already gives to these clients. And then we've just also received funding for a new staffing effort. So once the client has been trained and is ready to join the workforce, Career Resources is going to build and operate a staffing agency so that rather than just placing the client into a job and hoping for the best, the staffing agency will actually hold on to that client for an interim period of time while they enter the workforce. And Career Resources will work with that client for a 3 to 6 month period of time in partnership with the employer to make sure that that client succeeds in the job before Career Resources lets them go. So it's a way of expanding the reach and the amount of time that Career Resources will hold on to the client to ensure their success in the workforce.
Another example, Lindy, do you mind kind of sharing kind of the work of Emerge, which you've been directly involved in? Because they're really, I think, fascinating organization.
Getting more fascinating all the time. Our original project was the transition of a retirement of a charismatic director to what they at the time thought were going to be co-directors, which upon a lot of conversation and deliberation with the group that's working with them, and on our advice, they decided to go with a single director. They deal with a returning citizens group, and they really do work training, soft skills, financial training, counseling, family reintegration work in 2 areas. One is construction. The other is more landscape, environmental things. They've primarily worked with other nonprofits to fulfill because their model is unique. We are working with them to sort of diversify their business mix, to really have metrics, and to really have data which they haven't had. And there were some challenges also with their budgeting sophistication. So it's a very good team that is working with a lot of deep bench of experience and knowledge with all that they're engaged in. And I think that it's taking longer than our original project outline, but it's because we're all very interested in it and they really need it.
Question came in. One of you mentioned the distinction a moment ago between having specialized knowledge versus specialized skills. And the question is, which kind of presents the bigger challenge, or I guess by extension, just comparing knowledge and skills?
Well, I can answer from at least our teams. I've been on another team with Clifford Beers as well. The scope of work that Emerge needed is far different from a sophisticated organization like a Clifford Beers with a really full staff of very qualified people. That was not the case. The Emerge is a much more bare bones operation with great skills with the clients they serve, but it is much more work than that organization. And we have folks on our group that have the array of skill sets that complemented the skills that were already at the table.
Yeah, you know, Glenn, part of what, thank you for that, that's really great. Part of what we are is kind of a temp broker. In other words, kind of people come to SVP because they're interested, involved, and as a community, we select these nonprofits, you know, through a pretty rigorous investment process. So effectively, we curate kind of opportunities to get involved, and to get involved not just at the margin, but to get involved really in the core of what these organizations are doing, as Lindy and Chris have just described. And though we take a relationship-based approach, we're not just kind of in and out. We typically take the time to really get to know the organizations that we work with, because I think we could be much more effective that way.
Mark, you mentioned a moment ago the Governor's Council, the Governor's Workforce Council. Could you talk a little bit about the council's goals?
Sure. First of all, kind of the background is that every state has a council that oversees the federal government WIOA programs. And Governor Lamont decided to reorganize the council and really focus it on creating a statewide workforce strategy, and selected Garrick Moran to head it up, and brought in a lot of CEOs and university presidents and government leaders to work together over a one-year period in terms of creating a comprehensive workforce strategy. I would say that there are several kind of key themes or areas of focus that are kind of emerging from the work so far, which is we're about 6 months into. One is the notion of regional sector partnerships, that if we're going to really be effective in bringing together business and educational institutions and government agencies, we need to kind of create durable regional partnerships that are organized by sector. And so you'll be hearing more about that. We're going to be starting to get that kind of off the ground, and hopefully by the fall, we'll see in the major regions of the state, you know, organized around the workforce regions, we'll have these regional sector partnerships forming. Another whole area that we've been working very closely with the State Department of Education and higher education on trying to create more unified career pathways, education and career pathways, so that students have real clarity about kind of what the job opportunities out there are and what educational opportunities they have to develop the skills to be able to do that. And then you, of course, want to align those pathways with the real needs, skill needs of employers. So that's a big, you know, kind of multi-year effort to kind of build that. We're going to start it in some of the sectors that we think are really critical to the state, namely manufacturing, healthcare, IT and business services. And of course, there are parts of those pathways already built. So we have some really great work, especially in advanced manufacturing and healthcare, to build on. A third theme is better data and performance management systems. It's hard for us to improve our workforce system if we aren't keeping score. And so one of the big areas of kind of focus is building longitudinal data systems so that we can understand whether it's educational programs, job training programs, to be able to do that. And also the systems that enable job seekers, people who are looking for their careers, to be able to plan their careers, to jobs, to find opportunities. Another theme is work-based learning. There's a lot of really good examples in the state of work-based learning, but we think it's scaled so that more students, high school students and college students, have the opportunity to do things like internships, apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, and just other work-based experiences, because then they gain early exposure to they're going to build success. So those are kind of some of the themes emerging from the work in the Governor's Workforce Council. There are a number that are hard at work on fleshing out these ideas and programs.
And Mark, I'll add to that one of the things the themes that we keep running into is the challenge of how fragmented the state of Connecticut is. There are very few areas where there are economies of scale across the state. There aren't, each town runs its own operation. Until recently, each of the community colleges across the state was operating independently. Most of the nonprofits, there are thousands of them, and each one is operating, with a few exceptions, most are very regionalized. And so I think part of what the Governor's Council is trying to do is create some scale economies, is work with the entire community college system to come up with a uniform set of practices on workforce development, and to build these consortiums of businesses that do have more critical mass and can think statewide. So it's a tough one. It's going to take a long time, but I think it's a step in the right direction to make it easier to navigate and have more impact going forward.
The chat box asks about identifying opportunities, and as these opportunities crop up, what sort of frameworks or criteria do you use to practice due diligence about which opportunities to go after and develop?
Thank you, Eleanor. That's a great question. I'll put it in terms of how we select nonprofits like the ones you've heard about today. Everything we do is kind of led by our individual partners. So in our last investment process, we had about 35 partners that served as our investment committee. We solicited applications from a number of different nonprofits, and then had a whole set of criteria for evaluating those proposals. But that was only kind of step one. Really, the real meaningful due diligence part of it was the site visits, and then the individual interviews that we did with the leaders of the nonprofits, because we were really trying to answer ultimately a couple of questions through our process. One is, obviously, we had to make a decision as to who to give grants to, but at the same time, we were also looking to make a commitment to have a project team, as Lindy's described, kind of working with that nonprofit over time. So we had to really make sure that there was a good fit there, and that there was real work that SVP partners had the skills to be able to be helpful on. So we were doing kind of a really well-rounded kind of diligence process. In terms of the criteria, what we're looking for, our North Star is closing the opportunity gap in Connecticut. So we're looking for organizations that have demonstrated a successful program or programs to help close the opportunity gap. And, so we're looking at evidence of their effectiveness. We're looking at the leadership qualities of the team. We're looking at their ability to potentially scale and to be able to have more impact, because there's some organizations that do fine work but are really not that interested in growth or being able to reach more people. And I'm happy to report that the vast majority of the organizations that we're working with are growing and are kind of enhancing their programs and really having, greater impact over time. So it's really kind of a group process that we try to get better at all the time. We also learn from others. So we learn from the community foundations that we work very closely in this last process with the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, because they've obviously run processes. And we learn from others, and we adapt those practices, and we try to ourselves kind of innovate.
Well, just quickly, I was going to say that Emerge, that Lindy Lee was talking about, is a great example because it's a relatively small organization today. But when we looked at Emerge, we realized that they had a really best-in-class model in terms of how they're working with reentry clients and helping prepare them for the workforce. So we decided, despite the small size, that Emerge was an organization that had the opportunity to take their model and over time, because we have a 3+ year time horizon, so the opportunity to grow that model across the state, we think is there for sure.
I would also add that I think, because I sat on the committee prior, some of what we do is not that the organization itself has to grow, but if it can be replicated, and a formula sort of be developed, that in itself has some value. And the other thing is, because of an in-depth knowledge about things, we look at collaborations that may be possible for players that didn't know each other before.
That's a really great point, Lindy. And that's something, that we hear and see a lot, that oftentimes nonprofits work by themselves as opposed to collaborating and kind of trying to really, through that collaboration, potentially have more impact or operate more efficiently. And we're really, as we are more and more really focusing on that, point of trying to encourage collaboration among the different organizations, and practice in one place, part of the state that could be applied in another part. We really want to encourage, and so and even to the point of mergers, of encourage, supporting mergers and acquisitions, which we get involved in with helping some of our nonprofits.
Total philanthropic dollars in the state of Connecticut, total nonprofit contributions statewide is about $5 billion a year, but apparently about 60% of that $5 billion goes out of state. And that's because the big, and we have a very hard time in Connecticut attracting the Gates Foundations and the other big donors, big foundations to the state of Connecticut, because we don't have the scale. We don't have many big statewide nonprofits that to attract the attention of the largest donors. And so we're missing out on a lot of funding that's going elsewhere where there is more scale than what we've got here. And I think that's part of the Workforce Council's work is to try to change that.
So another question came in about decision making and criteria, but dropping down into the mindset of the employer, and in considering whether hiring, the costs and benefits of hiring from a marginalized group, and how from the employer's point of view to kind of tease that out and decide to go for it.
Actually, I want to ask Chris and Lindy each, because they both live this important issue every day in their advocacy work for returning citizens, for opportunity youth, et cetera.
I'm happy to start. I think obviously on the risk side, or the cost side, the challenge is that a lot of employers will say, wait a minute, do I really want to hire somebody who just came out of the prison system or who has been chronically unemployed or underemployed? I'm worried that they're not going to work out, or they're going to disrupt my organization. And so I think, but I think that the positives or the opportunities associated with this line up exactly with the value system of conscious capitalism, which is, if you do it right, and I think part of doing it right is partnering with an organization like Emerge or Career Resources, someone who can help to provide wraparound services to some of these at-risk clients. But if you partner well as an employer, I think you're bringing in an employee where you're tapping into the local community, number one. Number two, you're bringing in an employee and you're doing something for them which can be life-changing for them if it's successful. And if it is successful, I think your turnover is actually going to be much lower by bringing in an employee like that, in that the costs and the investment that you make up front are going to be relatively low versus the benefit of lower turnover and employee satisfaction and fidelity longer term. And I also think just in a culture where we have more and more employees who are millennials, where part of what they want from their employer is a culture of giving back to the community. And so what we're finding is, as we go out to companies and ask for help from a volunteerism standpoint, or from a managerial standpoint in terms of working with this client base, this at-risk client base, that people in their 20s and 30s love the opportunity to help invest in the success of an at-risk client coming from into these jobs.
Yeah, Chris, there's a couple of good examples of that sort of open recruiting. Grayston Bakery in the Bronx has been doing it for years, and they have an enormous data now to back up the wisdom of this open hiring plan. Their staff turnover and retention and morale are all on the red line. So clearly there are other brands that have already done that. And I think Body Shop is another one where they often practice open recruiting methods. I guess the challenge is now with COVID and so many people out of work, how can we, maintain or keep that inertia up in terms of best practice?
I think there are going to be challenges, Glenn, but there are so many benefits and so many voids that we can fill by really communicating with the employers. I will give you an example from the manufacturing community. I sit in on a lot of meetings, and it was more than clear that these young people that would graduate from the community college manufacturing programs would go to work for the small manufacturers, and according to them, it would take a year or more to make them really useful team players. And as soon as they really were valuable to the company, who had invested in all of this training, they would look for a better opportunity with benefits and medical and things that small companies couldn't really afford. So they were right back where they started, taking a new graduate, because these people were going to work for the electric boats, the Sikorskys, the UTCs. And I said, what would happen if we could supply you with a workforce that can't get a job where security clearance is demanded? And a little bit of initial resistance, and then it was really welcomed. So in terms of doing the pivot, finding the right niche, and providing the wraparound services and the training, it really hasn't been very problematic.
And I just want to compliment, Lindy's been a tireless advocate across the state in terms of, trying to provide opportunities for returning citizens. And I think it's a great population to really, train and develop opportunities for.
Thanks, Gavin. I'm watching your nods and wondering if this isn't a good time to bring you in to speak about culture and.
Yeah, obviously, for conscious capitalism, having a conscious culture is really critically important. And I'm nodding because, like what Lindy just said was perfect. And I've seen it happen you give people an opportunity who would normally have a very hard time getting it, and they are so intensely loyal. That it makes a huge difference. So, and if you've got the kind of company culture where people constantly have, you know, growth and learning opportunities, not only just maybe moving from a person who's just getting a first job, but eventually becoming a supervisor or manager, or learning other skills and switching to different departments. If you can constantly keep them growing and provide an opportunity for constant learning, that's just a recipe for success. You're going to have a much more resilient organization. It's going to handle disasters much better. People caring about each other, and all of that. Just a fantastic mix. So yeah, I was nodding because, you know, that kind of culture thing where you get people really committed to being part of your group is success. And you know, people will tend, you know, actually there's two sides to it in some ways, you know, because Grayston Bakery is trying to give people opportunities who otherwise wouldn't get them. And then their goal is to give them enough of a job experience that they can add that to their recipe, and then they can move on and get something else, you know, go to someplace else. So they actually want their people to move on.
That's very much what we do at Concat, Gavin.
Okay.
That's another SVP partner.
Yeah.
And so certainly the experience, the culinary training, and then on to the Orchid Cafe, and then onward and out to...
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's another company, or, you know, small coffee company, I think is Beans in Hartford, that's, you know, along the same model, that you want to see your people move on. And if that's part of your higher purpose, then that's great. On the other hand, yes, if you're a kind of organization that's not part of your purpose, and you just want a stable workforce, then it can get a little difficult when people move on. But then, you know, then the onus is really, in my mind, on the leadership to continue to create opportunities and training, and find out what is it that people want.
I think you hit the secret sauce, though, because it's career path within the same organization. And there's a wonderful example locally of a reentry citizen who a friend of mine hired.
Okay.
I happened to be in the office on a day that he was called in after having been there for 6 months, and he was handed a medical insurance card.
Oh, yeah.
Great big tough guy was in tears.
Yeah.
It was the first time in his entire life he'd ever had medical insurance.
Yeah.
So fast forward, he's now been there for a couple of years, but he's no longer on the manufacturing floor.
Yeah.
He learned how to program and design the product that they make.
Yep.
So he's in with the engineering group now. I mean, this is a superstar.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I've seen that, you know, in our organization, we would have that same sort of thing happen. People would come in, start a job on the production floor, being a blender operator or whatever. And next thing you know, they're in customer service, they're in purchasing, they're doing they're in IT, you know, they're in the maintenance shop, welding, they're doing something, you know, they've grown and they're doing something different. And that's very exciting for people to just, you know, to keep doing that, keep growing those capabilities.
And you also created into some side projects or discretionary initiatives where people could opt into them if they were personally interested, like energy auditing and reducing the energy expenses.
Yeah, we did that too. So we would have, you know, some of the things that we did were like a lean initiative. And so, you know, the way we looked at lean is lean was a growth strategy. It was something so that if you could figure out a way to do it better and simpler with fewer people, that meant that not that somebody got fired, that meant that you freed somebody up to do some other cool new thing. There's also a chance for people to work on the business instead of in the business. So one of the things we did was we had an energy lean initiative to figure out what we could do to save electricity. And we hired some consultants to come in and teach us how to do an audit, how to, you know, figure that out and measure it. And then we did the audit ourselves, figured it out, and came up with a whole bunch of solutions, and people implemented those. So it's much more exciting to do something like that, and learning a whole set of new skills. And we had people from all across the organization. We had people from the one guy who was the head of the analytical lab was on the team, as well as some people from maintenance and people from customer service. All kinds of people were on the energy team because they were just passionate about saving energy. So the chance to do cool new stuff.
So a question about another marginalized group would be methadone clinic patients. Glenn and I work with the APT Foundation, and Marna's curious about any experience the speakers have had or considerations around that group and their job challenges and workforce development.
I think it's a broader issue of mental health and job training. As you might know, I was a founder of Fellowship Place, which does a lot of they consider themselves a club, first of all, not a practice. So that job training was a very big part of it. Now, initially, we didn't have substance abusers, and then it became a real thing. And whether or not those folks are on methadone or on some other program, I don't think the staff probably knows, but they've certainly been given opportunities, some very successfully, some not so much.
I saw there was a question out there also about the pandemic and kind of how that's, kind of affected our work. So obviously we're all virtual right now, but in terms of the substance of our work, it's fair to say that all of our nonprofits have had to pivot big time. They obviously have to take care of the basic needs of their populations, which may mean food distribution or other kind of assistance to families. If they're in mental health, it's pivoting to a telehealth model like Clifford Beers and Child First have had to do. In education, it's trying to embrace online learning kind of programs. In the employment or in the workforce side, the Workforce Council has tried to initiate some responses to the terrible unemployment that we have. One is by getting an online learning platform up that provides opportunities for the unemployed to develop their skills. And this is being done through the workforce boards. So Skillsoft is being offered to the unemployed from an IT standpoint. And then 180 Skills is an online program that's being offered in manufacturing for reskilling, for upskilling kind of opportunities. There's also an effort to try to get new job training programs off the ground. We're working on one in Fairfield County of training hospitality workers to be frontline healthcare employees. And we're partnered with 3 hospitals and 2 community colleges on that effort. And an SVP partner who is a nurse has been kind of working with philanthropy and kind of leading the effort on that. There are efforts around the state to deal with the lack of physical summer jobs, and trying to create more online virtual summer youth job programs. We're also trying to get an effort going on the problem of summer melt, where seniors in high school, especially in many of our urban areas, are cut off from advisors and counselors and might miss out on the chance to go to college, as evidenced by the fact that they're not getting right now their financial aid applications in. So we're trying to, get an initiative kind of stood up on that effort right now. And then also more philanthropically, there's a new organization formed by some SVP partners called Force CT that is providing emergency aid to nonprofits around the state in collaboration with government. And they've raised $18 million. And they're doing things like supporting the food bank and food share and other food distribution efforts, as well as the community healthcare centers and various other really important nonprofits around the state. So the fact is we're doing a lot, but it is obviously the pandemic is a huge, problem, in our state and in our world. So.
Thank you. This is a question that came in that actually we could open up and see who all might have input on, which is what are the opportunities for SVP and conscious capitalism to work together? And this is also an opportunity for leaders of both organizations to tell everyone how to get involved.
I'll catch that. Thank you, Eleanor. I mean, it's great to hear, Mark, the work that you guys have been doing, and Chris. Like for example, the 4CT. That $18 million has come out of nowhere. So you guys are clearly connected with some great capital resources, and the fact that you are the interface with the nonprofits that are, in some cases, in many cases, the best designed to deliver these services. So I'm really enjoying this education that I've got in the last hour about how these partnerships are created to deliver better services. And of course, there's no more need than there is now in terms of many people in the community that are struggling to find work or keep it. So I'm delighted to hear about that. And of course, closing the opportunity gap is a huge sort of focus of the conscious capitalist movement, because there are so many people there that are suffering with this enormous wealth gap in this country, and so I'm excited to identify those as shared interests, and hopefully we can continue working and spotlighting the good work like we're doing today, and also revealing some new opportunities. And of course, going forward in the next few months, there's going to be an enormous amount of stress and challenge in so many levels in the tertiary education market, in everything we've talked about today. So perhaps we should consider this the first of a series of conversations that we can have together about how we can combine our resources and deal with that. What do you think, Mark?
I love what you said, Glenn. I would say that we can certainly connect at an individual level. We would love to have business leaders involved in the work that we're doing. We can also kind of find a project that really speaks to conscious capitalism, to your team here, your members. We can work with you on that.
I think the other thing is that most people that are sitting around conscious capitalism's table are invested in nonprofits that SVP may not even be aware of, or at least the breadth of what they do. So in terms of reaching out for discussion, if not for assistance, so that we might better know how to interconnect with those groups, might be very helpful.
I think it's a great idea, Lindy. And one of the services that we do offer is if a nonprofit would like to just set up a meeting, with some SVP partners to kind of really discuss whatever issues are critical to that nonprofit. That is something we do all the time. So, which is just it's not a long-term project. It's kind of just a one meeting kind of brainstorming, effort. So.
But the group is a group of lifelong learners. Yeah. So no matter what kind of meeting they have, they will be fully engaged.
Arthur, if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. I want to make sure you get the exact information you were looking for about the manufacturing platform.
Thank you. I just remember I think Mark or Chris, someone was sharing that there's an online skills training platform for the manufacturing sector. I didn't catch the name. I heard the Skillsoft platform, but I didn't hear the name of the other.
Mark's an expert.
Mark, okay, sorry.
Lindy's actually a pretty good expert too on this. It's called 180 Skills.
180 Skills.
And it was originally developed around the aerospace and automotive and other kind of industry, manufacturing industries. Think of it as kind of like an online library of 800 courses that all have competency-based kind of exams, and it's very interactive. It's very intuitive, and that you can, as an individual company, actually subscribe or utilize the platform for training your existing workforce. It can be used by educators like community colleges and other kind of training programs. So this is kind of a platform that is just getting introduced now in the last couple of weeks into Connecticut, and you'll, I'm sure, learn about it through the Workforce Alliance here and other groups that will be involved with it.
And by way of background, 180 Skills, I think its origins were in working with Boeing out on the West Coast. I think a number of the courses that they developed were in collaboration with Boeing in terms of training their employees. And so the standard is pretty high in terms of the quality of what they've created.
Thank you for that, Arthur. Someone in the group is wondering if you have any concerns, Mark or Chris or Lindy, about AI and robotics catching up as fast as people are able to learn these new skills.
I don't think, except for the jobs, I mean, the manufacturing community is certainly not considering that robotics are going to do other than complement workforce. They don't see it as workforce replacement. So it depends. I'm sure that there are some areas in which AI will change the nature of the work and maybe the skill sets of the people they need. I don't think it's going to diminish workforce needs.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's, it depends on the sector, but I would say that obviously that's one of the reasons why we're emphasizing IT, because there isn't any reason why our workforce in Connecticut shouldn't be digitally, leaders and be very much kind of developing the next generations of AI and other, kind of tools. Healthcare obviously is a field that's going to, while they certainly utilize technology, it is very obviously, kind of hands-on and service-based. And as Lindy said, I think kind of some of the technology, whether it's additive or robotics or Industry 4.0 in manufacturing, is going to make our manufacturers more competitive, from a global standpoint, and I think enable our sector to grow. It does mean that our workforce, though, needs to be better, skilled and trained. And that's where these education and training programs come in. It's not going to be the case increasingly that you can go directly from high school to a job in manufacturing. You're going to need some additional post-secondary education and training. And that in order to really be able to utilize the technology that you're going to be working with. So.
And if I could, we're almost out of time, but just to add one more. I think too many of the courses in the community college system, for example, are currently focused on what's called Gen Ed or general education, which I think is setting up graduates to jump into jobs where technology might replace that position. So we're working with the community college system to try to diminish general education and focus on the kind of training that will lead to lasting jobs in spite of technology. And the other perspective is that the American Jobs Centers around the state also do currently not enough training, in my opinion, and therefore they're placing a lot of their clients into retail jobs, other jobs that are at risk. And so boosting the amount of training and the quality of training that's out there is only going to help to try to counter this this trend toward technology and automation.
Well, how do you like that, Glenn? We've got such a curious group, and they had all kinds of questions and amply filled the time. And here we are at the top of the hour.
Glenn, thank you so much for this great opportunity. And thank you, Lindy and Chris, for, leading the way, with your sharing those stories and experiences.
Really appreciate your time, Mark and Chris, and your great input, Lindy, as always. And I just want to let you know that we've got some interesting programming coming up around racial equity in partnership with our sister organisation in Portland, Maine. We've got things coming up around sustainability and work culture in the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that in your inbox. And we really appreciate all your time today. Thanks for coming. See you soon.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.